Minnesota is now following California. And if you think this is just another harmless piece of paperwork coming out of the state legislature, you need to think again because Minnesota's HF 3865 is being sold as a simple clarification of collector car rules. But the reality is far more consequential. This proposal doesn't just tweak the language, it redraws the lines around when you're allowed to enjoy your vehicle that you already own. And don't worry, other states are watching this, and this is where the concern comes in. Because if this law passes as written, classic car owners could find themselves boxed into a narrow window of acceptable use, with little room for the freedom that defines our car culture. For decades, collector vehicle laws have operated on a basic understanding. These vehicles are not daily transportation, and owners accept that limitation in exchange for reduced registration requirements in that state, and in many cases, historic recognition. But within this framework, there's always been a reasonable level of flexibility. Owners could take their vehicles out for a drive, attend informal gatherings, test car repairs, or simply just enjoy the result of years of restoration work. Well, HF 3865 changes that balance. The bill establishes a centralized rule governing how all collector class vehicles can be operated in Minnesota. These include vintage vehicles, classic cars, collector cars, street rods, military vehicles, and classic motorcycles. While the legislation retains the existing restriction against using these vehicles for general transportation or everyday use, it goes much farther by narrowing when they can be legally driven. This is where the problem starts, because under the proposed language, collector car vehicles would be permitted on public roads during daylight hours on Saturdays and Sundays only. They would also be allowed for use in connecting car exhibitions, parades, car shows, and similar organized events. But outside of those circumstances, however, the bill leaves little room for interpretation. If you want to go for a weekday drive, an evening outing, a cruise night, or an informal meetup, are no longer clearly protected and could be interpreted as violating the law. Supporters of the bill argue that this provides clarity when current law is vague. They are obviously anti-car politicians. They point out that existing statutes do not explicitly define acceptable use of events such as car shows or parades, creating an inconsistency in enforcement. Who just goes to a car show or a parade? Because most collector car owners drive their cars and enjoy them whenever they want. And by outlining specific permitting activities, lawmakers say they are protecting the intent of the collector vehicle registration and ensuring that the system is not being abused by drivers looking to avoid standard registration requirements. This is total BS and actually means they don't want us to own them or drive our own vehicles. This is why I'm frustrated. Does this argument have any merit? Abuse of collector car plates has been a concern in multiple states, particularly when vehicles that qualify for special registration are used as regular transportation. This is a very rare situation. But how is this ensuring that collector status is not exploited is a legitimate goal of any legislature. This appears to be about control and following California's rules. That's no surprise. But the issue here is not whether the rules should exist. It's how far those rules go and whether they reflect reality. Car culture does not operate on a government schedule. It's not limited to weekends between sunrise and sunset. It exists in unplanned moments, a midday cruise after work, a short drive to evaluate a repair, a small gathering at a local coffee shop, or an evening event that brings together enthusiasts and friends from just any community. These are not fringe cases. They are the backbone of the hobby. Next, they'll be limiting how far and when and where you drive, every car. Is this just a stepping stone? We've seen this before in California, and nothing surprises us. By effectively restricting operation to weekends and sanctioned events, HF 3865 risks disconnecting the law from the lived experience of collector car ownership. It replaces flexibility with rigidity. It does so in a way that could create confusion rather than clarity. It takes away your freedom to drive, which is what the automobile is literally all about. One of the bill's most problematic elements is the reliance on broad, undefined terms. Exhibitions and similar special events are not clearly defined, leaving significant room for interpretation. Does an informal gathering qualify as an exhibition? What about a charity event that's not officially registered? Could enforcement vary depending on how an individual officer interprets that situation? Oh, yes, we know this happens. That kind of ambiguity is rarely helpful. It opens the door to inconsistent enforcement and puts the burden on owners to prove they are operating within the law. For the car community that generally values compliance and preservation, that uncertainty creates unnecessary legal issues. There's also a broader economic impact to consider. The collector car world supports a wide network of businesses, from restoration shops and parts suppliers to event organizers and local venues that host car gatherings, as well as charities. Limiting when vehicles can be driven could reduce participation in these activities, affecting not just hobbyists, but the businesses that rely on them and the charities as well. Beyond economics, there is a cultural dimension that is harder to quantify, but equally important. Classic cars are more than machines. They are rolling pieces of history representing decades of design, engineering, and craftsmanship. They are pieces of art. They connect generations, bring together enthusiasts who share knowledge, stories, and a passion for preservation. When the access to that culture is restricted, even unintentionally, the impact goes beyond inconvenience. It affects how the history is experienced and passed on. To be fair, HF 3865 does include provisions that are largely administrative. It standardizes languages across statutes, updates registration requirements, and clarifies definitions for different categories of collector vehicles. Owners would still be required to register their vehicles, pay a modest fee, and provide an affidavit confirming the vehicle's status as a collector's item. I'm not sure I like the last part of that law, but it's all in the details. These changes are not the source of concern. The debate centers on operational limits, specifically whether the state should dictate not just how the collector vehicle can be classified, but when they can be enjoyed. Minnesota is not the first state to wrestle with this issue. It will not be the last. Legislators across the country have tried to strike a balance between preventing abuse and preserving the spirit of the collector vehicle ownership. And most have opted for guidelines that allow for a reasonable discretion, recognizing the rigid rules often fail to account for real-world behavior. But HF 3865 takes a more authoritarian approach, and that's where we're all concerned. The risk with that approach is not just overreach, but compliance. Laws that feel disconnected from common practice are less likely to be followed consistently, which can lead to uneven enforcement and growing frustration. This is not a sustainable outcome for regulators or for the public or for us, the car owners. But at the same time, lawmakers are right to address legitimate concerns about misuse of collector plates, which is actually rare. The challenge is finding a solution that targets abuse without penalizing responsible owners who are simply engaging in a long-standing hobby. We love this hobby and we want to be able to drive our cars, but HF 3865, as currently written, leans heavily toward restrictions. Whether that trade-off is justified is a question that deserves careful consideration, not just from lawmakers, but from communities that will be affected. Because once you start telling enthusiasts exactly when they're allowed to enjoy their own vehicles, you're no longer just regulating a registration category. You're redefining a culture and restricting our freedoms. And that's a line lawmakers should think very careful about before crossing. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe for more videos like this, and check out our car review channel, Car Smarts. You can support me by buying me a cup of coffee, and if you want even more content, check out the links in the description. I'm Lauren Fix. Thank you so much for watching.